If the Navy would have charged every officer or admiral that were involved with me, the Navy would not have any more admirals.
The story of Fat Leonard is the story of how a single man planned corruption in the United States Navy's operations. From 2006 to 2014, Glenn had many Navy officers on his side. By using bribes and kickbacks to parties with prostitutes, this man crossed many lines when it comes to deteriorating the trust that the American people have on their government. Glenn, better known as Fat Leonard, a nickname given to him by Navy sailors, was a Malaysian defense contractor whose personality and ambitions were as big as the storm. His company was Glenn Defense Marine Asia, or GDMA. The Singapore-based company held over $250 million in U.S. defense contracts and provided necessary supplies to Navy ships. GDMA provided ship husbanding and logistical support services to the United States Navy when Navy ships visited various ports in Southeast Asia. During military operations, Navy ships will park in ports for GDMA to service them. Leonard then proceeded to inflate the cost of port services, often charging more than double the actual cost. Leonard also created fraudulent contracts to justify these inflated prices. In return for these so-called favors, Leonard would hold parties in bars and resorts that included prostitutes. He held lavish parties for more than a decade, which paid dividends as naval officers provided him with classified documents such as ship schedules. Why did Leonard need these ship schedules? So he can have an advantage over rivals by knowing where the Navy would be headed to next.
Military officials looked the other way while he gouged the Navy for fuel, water, ship repairs, and sewage removal, defrauding U.S. taxpayers of an estimated $50 million. In 2010, after years of ignoring fraud charges regarding his business, the Naval Criminal Investigative Service finally investigated Francis's operations in depth. However, because he had bought an NCIS agent to provide him access to confidential law enforcement documents, he was aware that he was being investigated. In September 2013, Navy personnel were able to entice him to the US for a fictitious meeting with contracting authorities in San Diego. In a sting operation in a hotel in San Diego involving over 100 federal law enforcement officers, he was taken into custody. The suspicious billing practices or fake services by Francis's company, GDMA, had caught the eye of federal investigators. Interestingly, they found a web of corruption so intricate that it spanned across the Pacific.
Well, all of them knew about what was going on, but they just kind of like turned a blind eye because, I provided them a service nobody else could have, and I did it good.
So he wasn't sailing this ship alone. Over 30 naval officials and defense contractors were caught in the net, leading to a wave of convictions. In 2015, Francis pleaded guilty to bribing more than 30 officials. He confessed that he had offered more than $500,000 in cash bribes to Navy officials, defense contractors, and others. It is estimated that he gained around $35 million from the US Navy, including overcharging the Pentagon for made-up services. He did all of this in exchange for some classified information. He cooperated with the investigation leading to the Navy convictions as part of his plea deal. He would face up to 25 years in jail. While awaiting sentencing, Francis was treated for cancer and other medical issues in the hospital. After treatment, he was permitted to stay out of jail at a rental home on house arrest with GPS ankle monitored and security guards. But 3 weeks before his scheduled sentencing in September 2022, he fled to Mexico, made his way to Cuba, and eventually got to Venezuela. Leonard had escaped. Authorities arrested him more than 2 weeks after his disappearance. He has been in custody in Venezuela ever since, and he sought asylum there. The US government brought him back by making a deal with Venezuela, in which the US released the ally of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro in exchange of 10 imprisoned Americans and Francis. This scandal didn't just make headlines, it sent shockwaves to the Navy. It exposed gaping holes in the Navy's contracting process and led to a complete overhaul to prevent future betrayals and trust. On 21 May 2024, Janet San Martino, a San Diego federal judge,
blasted the U.S. Attorney's Office for its significant misconduct, saying the continued crumbling of the case is an embarrassment to the government. Janice Sammartino made the comments during a hearing in which she agreed reluctantly to throw out a previous guilty plea by former Navy Commander Stephen Shedd and dismissed all charges against him. She also dismissed felony pleas by 3 other former Navy officers and a retired Marine colonel, and allowed the 4 men to each plead guilty to a single misdemeanor. The dismissals come at a request of the government, not the defense prosecutors. The judge said that the action does not mean the defendants did not commit the charged crimes, but because information was withheld from the defense and other mistakes were made, they wanted to ensure justice was served fairly. Some people will call this corruption, others will call it incompetence from the prosecutor. I personally find it very difficult to believe that somebody commits a crime, they admit to committing the crime, there's evidence that they have committed the crime, they have witnesses claiming that they have committed the crime, yet they are not being held accountable. The last thing we want to do is to set a precedent. The Fat Leonard scandal had a large impact on the U.S. Navy. Operational security was severely compromised as sensitive information about ship movements and schedules was leaked, potentially endangering missions and personnel. The Navy suffered tens of millions of dollars in losses due to fraudulent billing and inflated contracts orchestrated by Leonard's company. This scandal also caused significant reputational damage and crisis of trust within the Navy. The involvement of numerous high-ranking officers and corruption eroded public confidence and tarnished the Navy's image.